In this presentation, I will be discussing an attack that occurred in 2019, which resulted in the release of the data of over 500 million Facebook users to the public. It is unknown when exactly the attack occurred, but it is possible that it occurred over a long period of time. All we know is that the vulnerability was brought to the attention of Facebook by a researcher seeking a bounty as early as 2017. The 2017 researcher did not receive a bounty, however, meaning Facebook did not see any threat from the vulnerability. In August of 2019, however, a researcher seeking a bounty who goes by @zhacker13 on Twitter was able to successfully prove the possibility of such an attack as the one which we now know to have occurred. The vulnerability was subsequently patched out in the same month, and zhacker13 received a $4,000 bounty. The bounty was only given out after zhacker13 was interviewed by Forbes about his findings in that September. The data seems to span from 2018 to June of 2019, although it could have spanned to an earlier date or a later date. Facebook did not reveal that the attack had occurred until after the data was already leaked by the attacker in April of 2021, almost 2 years later. The vulnerability in this case had to do with Facebook's feature for syncing contacts. The feature was designed to gain access to a user's contact list if they were accessing the platform via their cell phone. The feature would then connect existing Facebook accounts to any phone numbers that match them to allow users to add their real-life friends on Facebook. The problem with this feature comes when we consider the idea of phone number enumeration. Seeing as a phone number is merely a 10-digit sequence of numbers, it is very easy to just create a phone number. If one were to choose 10 digits that happened to combine to form a phone number of a Facebook user, add this to their contacts, and try to import their contacts onto Facebook, the feature would allow the user to gain access to information about the person to whom the phone number belonged. Obviously, this would connect people to phone numbers, but the feature also seemingly revealed email addresses, Facebook IDs, and addresses. The real danger of this comes when you can do it on a large scale by enumerating many phone numbers. zhacker13 was able to prove that this was possible, leading to Facebook eventually granting him his bounty. The actual attackers have not been identified, so we do not have access to their exact story of how they pulled off the attack. But the steps they likely took have been outlined by Facebook to explain what happened. First, the attackers enumerated a large list of phone numbers. Then, likely in order to avoid detection, and presumably to work with the import contacts feature, they split the list up into smaller lists. Next, mobile devices were simulated and given these lists as their contact lists. From here, each simulated device could use the import contact feature to see if they had any matches in their enumerated phone number list with real Facebook users. Much of this process was likely automated as so many users were impacted, and presumably so many phone numbers were enumerated in order to get the largest number of possible results. From this point, data scraping was likely employed to compile the information into a single file. Data scraping, simply put, is an automated means of gathering data from some internet source and condensing it into one place. As stated before, this attack resulted in the release of the data of approximately 533 million Facebook users, including their names, emails, phone numbers, and addresses. All of this information was kept secret by the attacker for approximately 2 years until this past April, when it was released publicly for any other attackers to see and use. The real danger with this attack is the avenues for more attacks it can open up. With this information being public on the internet, it can be used by attackers for any sort of malicious intent, likely for monetary gain. Primarily, it opens the victims up to a higher risk of phishing attacks. Phishing is when scammers lie about their identities to attempt to gain private information from victims. Often, they will pretend to be a bank and email their targets, hoping that the targets will be tricked into giving up sensitive information, such as passwords, credit card numbers, bank information, etc. The danger increases even more so given that Facebook did not notify its users. For example, if you didn't know that your email address was public information and you got an email that claimed to be from your bank, which identified you by name, you would be more inclined to believe it than if you knew that your information was available to attackers. Thankfully, there are measures that can be taken to protect ourselves against such phishing scams. For example, in response to this attack and others like it, the website haveibeenpwned.com was created, which allows users to search for their email addresses or phone numbers and see if they have been exposed in any data leaks. I tried the website for myself and saw that my phone number was still secure, although my email address was apparently revealed in 3 separate data breaches. With this knowledge, I now know I need to be careful of possible scams being sent to my email address. As stated before, Facebook's response to the attack included a bug patch at least 1 year after the attack presumably began, as we know that some of the leaked data is from as early as 2018, and the patch was not implemented until August of 2019. We also know that neither the public nor the FTC were informed of the attack for almost 2 years before Facebook was forced to inform the public due to the public posting of the data. Additionally, even once the attack was public, Facebook made no efforts to inform individuals if their data had been stolen. After the attack became public knowledge, Facebook was forced to pay the FTC $5 billion in a settlement for failing to protect the data of its users. As for the actual patch, Facebook has been very vague as to what measures were taken to stop future attacks from occurring. They have stated that they have put data and rate limits in place, which would stop attackers from accessing too much data too quickly, which would stop the automation that is very important to making such a large attack viable. They've also mentioned working to identify patterns in order to be able to detect and stop data scrapers as they are attacking. Beyond this, Facebook did not give any information on their measures to stop future attacks. But this is expected, as such information could help future attackers know what security systems are in place for them to try and breach. From this attack, I think we can draw a few conclusions. First, we need to think more about who we can really trust with our information. Even massive companies that seem untouchable are susceptible to breaches, and because of their size, are more often the targets of large attacks like this. We need to have a certain skepticism about us in any interaction on the internet. We should be skeptical about corporations when they promise security, and we need to be skeptical of possible scams and phishing attempts. Finally, we need to be aware of the resources available to us to combat further attacks, such as websites like haveibeenpwned.com. This attack brings up 2 important questions. One is, how do we know who to trust with our information on the internet? Another is, how can we try to protect ourselves from attacks like this in the future?